Yes, I am BT Gilligan. I don't know what was said about me before I walked in the room. If it was good, it's all true. If it was bad, it's totally false. I am the pastor at Nixon United Methodist Church, which, as you heard, is right off the airport. I took a week off, and we had a guest preacher, and I was listening to the recording afterwards because he asked for some feedback. And I hear airplanes going off. I'm like, that is really annoying. Does that happen every week? The answer is yes. Yes, in the middle of every service, there are airplanes taking off. As we get started in this, there's a couple of things I want to point out first. Number one, I am biased. I personally believe that the United Methodist Church is better when we stay together. And I want to get that out of the way first because everyone is biased and everyone brings their bias to everything. And that is a fair statement and an honest statement, and I don't want you to think that I'm trying to hide that. That being said, myself and David and another man named Tracy Merrick got together and we wrote a comparison, which maybe you have. Everyone has one? Perfect. I'm going to refer to it a lot. It is a big, clunky document of like 25 pages. It's okay if you don't get it or it's confusing. We're going to try and answer some of that today. And while we all have bias in this document, we did our best to take out that bias and be as honest as possible. So please know you're going to read that. One of the things I will encourage you to do with it is we've listed references to the United Methodist Book of Discipline, the Global Methodist Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines, and their other various documents. We've listed paragraph numbers, and we've tried to keep everything as open as possible. Janet, I will answer your question. I hear it, I see you. We've tried to keep everything, and so I will encourage you to take everything I'm saying and do your own research. You have to come to your own decision. Whether you stay in the United Methodist Church, you leave and join the Global Methodist Church, or you leave and join a totally different denomination, is about what is best for the congregation you are in. And as much as I have my opinion, you need to take that, you need to test what we're saying and figure out what's going to work best for you. Okay, yes?
I'm asking you a question.
Yes. I'm not, normally it's the other way around.
We saw you in a question, so I want to point out what we got was not the chart. We got
Okay.
the list of your questions.
Yes.
We didn't get the actual comparison chart.
Yes, when I say comparison chart, this is the document.
Okay, so there is a comparison chart.
We did not necessarily put out a direct chart, but yes, there are several charts going around. Yes, there are several charts. She's waving one. I can't see it from here. Good. Yes, there are lots, and there are lots written from all over, from the Wesley Covenant Association, from various progressives.
This may be the one they're waving. You may want to have a call.
This is the one they're waving.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Oh.
I've only got eyes that look forward.
Yes, what we are working through is it's titled Questions for United Methodists Considering the New Global Methodist Church. That's what we're going to work through. I'll put that here in case I need it. And part of what I'm going to talk about and part of our discussion tonight does presuppose a certain level of understanding of the United Methodist Church, its structure, its organization. And I apologize if you don't know that. Please ask me and I will clear that up. I know for some of us it may have been a little bit since we've been in confirmation class, and that's okay. I want to make sure we are all on board and moving at the same pace. We divided this document really it's 4 sections, but the first 3 are the main ones that we want to talk about. Because we all know, or if you've been paying attention to this process for any length of time, the presenting issue is homosexuality and a separation around that. But there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more that we need to think through before we sign on that proverbial dotted line. Because once we've done that, it's too late. And so we divided this document into 3 sections. Questions for laity, and a lay person or laity is anyone who's not clergy. Then we have questions for clergy, both as elders and as deacons. And we'll kind of gloss over that section tonight because that's more for clergy. We can talk about it, but it's more, most people aren't going to get as much out of that. And then we have some general questions for congregations as a whole. And we'll try and keep to a time. I know there's going to be time for questions and answers, so we may have to jump into some more specific things to your congregation, and that's totally fine. So we're really not going to talk much about the homosexuality piece, although we can. You'll see right there at the very beginning, it's questions for laity. And number 1 is talking about how to become members of a Global Methodist Church congregation, or how to retain membership within the United Methodist Church. Those 2 pieces, I think, are going to be very important. And because whatever your congregation decides, if you decide something different, you are going to have to make a choice. If Central Highlands here decides to join the Global Methodist Church, and you say, no, I want to be United Methodist, your membership will transfer to the Global Methodist Church, and you will have to make a decision to either continue attending Central Highlands or find a new United Methodist Church. But the opposite is also true. That if Central Highlands stays United Methodist, but you say, well, I want to be a Global Methodist, then you would have to find a church that is Global Methodist. And each church has its own membership requirements that you would need to fulfill. You would need to ask questions, seek out that pastor of that church. But this is a big deal. And you know, as a pastor, one of the things that I always worry about are how people perceive this. This is not cut and dry around homosexuality anymore. Because now, I'm no longer a member of a church I grew up in. I'm no longer a member of the church I was married in or baptized in. And now I have to go somewhere else. That's a huge, weighty issue. I've run into people who have said, well, I'm just not going anywhere then. I'm just not going to go to church anymore because they made a decision I disagree with. Now we see that all the time, but this seems so much weightier. Now, if you were to join the Global Methodist Church, you don't necessarily stay on their membership until you die, or transfer, or withdraw. Unlike the United Methodist Church, they offer a new category of membership called the inactive member, which they reference in their draft and transitional doctrines and disciplines. That if you are deemed negligent in your responsibilities as a member, you can be involuntarily placed on an inactive role. Now, you're suspended from serving on church committees or voting on church matters. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm saying it can happen. If you sense a call to ministry, if you feel called to be a pastor, there is a process for that. They have that, and that can be done. But you have to follow their process, and that is going to be different than in the United Methodist Church. And it's outlined actually in the questions for clergy if you wanted to do that. But we will move on from that section and turn with me. Yes.
Can we ask questions while you're doing this?
I don't know, I'm not in charge.
Because, you know, you talk about them striking you from the role. The Methodist Church did do that.
We do have a process if someone, it is a three-year process, multiple year process. I don't have my book of discipline handy. It's a multiple year process that is reserved for when we have no contact with you. If we don't know how to get a hold, if we've tried to get a hold of you, but we can't, then there is that process, but it is multiple years, and David's pulling up his book of discipline.
Yeah, there's no procedure in the United Methodist Church for anyone, pastor or whatever, to declare someone inactive and suspended from participation. There is, however, a procedure, and it's in the section on the local church, where the charge conference can remove someone, but there has to be a process of contact and
He
solicitation.
also, you talked about a process for the GNC
Yes.
to go through.
Yes, the process for the United Methodist Church is I can't look at you and say you're negligent, I'm sorry. But within the Global Methodist Church, if you are deemed negligent in your responsibilities, you are involuntarily placed on an inactive role. Now, what does that mean to be negligent in your responsibilities? The Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines, paragraph 322, and the Draft Book of Doctrines and Disciplines, paragraph 409, does not specify. It simply says if you're negligent.
It says each local church can
Yeah.
establish a grace-filled process.
So, what does that look like?
Does that mean that they don't contact you, like the United Methodist Church does?
It says
It doesn't say
correct.
how they go about it.
Correct. It's left up to the local church. So they might, but they might not. They could just leave you, they could just move you and never tell you, but which
I personally don't see that happen.
and I'm not saying it will happen, and please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying it can happen, and that's kind of the difference there. Yes.
It's a real difference, a level of accountability. At the global church, they're putting accountability in place for everybody, laity, clergy, across the board. Versus right now, it's kind of open. There's not the same level of accountability with the United Methodist Church. Expected.
Tell me what you mean by accountability.
Exactly what you were saying, that if you don't meet certain requirements as an active member of the church, then the default is you're not an active member of the church. They'll define what that is, and everybody will know what the accountability is. That's not necessarily the case going forward in the Methodist Church. It's dependent upon where you are, which congregation.
So
Guidelines, but we're not a level of accountability that's as strict.
I'm gonna answer that question, and I think we're gonna get to some of the root of what's actually happening. Within the United Methodist Church, there is that accountability. Whether or not it gets exercised is a very different story. And if I'm being very honest, I think that's part of the root of some of the issues here. That accountability is there within our book of discipline, it just does not always get exercised. Can you imagine if your pastor looked at you and said, you haven't been here in 4 years, you don't support the church, you're not living into your membership vows, so we're going to take you off the list, even though you don't necessarily want it. That process, and the SPRC and the district superintendent's getting a phone call. Yes, Janet.
So what 322 says is that the congregation develops a standard, people are called into accountability, they're encouraged to return to an active faith, there's a grace-filled process, they're put on an inactive role by 2/3 vote of the church council, and they can stay in that inactive role
Yes.
So
Does,
it's not like you walked into church for the first time in 5 years and the pastor says, we're sorry, we're gone.
right. Now, does it define what negligent is? What a negligent in their responsibilities as a member?
If a member neglects their membership vows and congregation makes, and vows are what they are.
So it,
That's very similar to what we do now.
so it only emphasizes that if they're negligent in their vows, but how do we define negligent in their vows?
How do we define it now?
I mean, that's, well, we can define it any way we want now. That's not how the Global Methodist Church is.
It doesn't define it.
Right, that's the problem, is it's not defined.
And neither does the UMC.
Well, yes, but we're talking about the Global Methodist Church. Yes. Jude, yes.
Historically, on one hand, I would say, to me, this sounds no different than what our Presbyterian brothers and sisters do. In the BCUSA church, they have an inactive list that people can be put onto. They still do it that way, in my understanding, because they operate like we used to operate, where your apportionments or mission shares were based on a per capita basis. And so back when we were on a per capita basis, there was a lot more membership audits happening, which is what we're supposed to be doing, that we don't do anymore because we're no longer on a per capita basis.
Yes.
So, part of this is the accountability piece because we aren't doing the membership audits we should be doing, contacting people as we should be contacting them. Hence, what you're saying is, what they're looking to do is to take care of the problem that currently is, because most of us haven't seen half of our membership rolls in a decade.
So I'm going to tell a story about a church that Jude used to be the pastor of because I followed him there. At one point, I'm a brand new pastor. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do everything we're supposed to. And I'm going to audit the membership books. And I walked into the first charge conference with a list of people that have never graced the doors of the church. I thought the charge conference was going to riot. I thought they were going to riot. And after that, I have never brought names to charge conference before. Again, because there was so much emotion and grief tied into this. Because this was their grandparents. And I'm like, but you're 90. Your grandparents were born 2 centuries ago. They're not alive anymore. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter to them. And so we end up in a situation we are in now. Jude's laughing because he knows the church.
Because they're family.
They're family.
No, they're my family.
Well, they're your family, yes. Yes.
It's important, BT, I think, to indicate under 5, and this I suspect it's just a pure pastoral hunch, but it establishes a procedure whereby the charge conference may require people to renew their vows annually, and that may be one way that there is this kind of informal weeding in and weeding out. If it's a may, of course, but if a charge conference elects to do that, inactive members are not likely to show up to do that, and therefore they could be placed on the inactive roll that way.
And I think one of the things to add here is we're seeing kind of discussions on both sides here, is this is not good or bad. And I am not trying to make a statement and saying, well, this is absolutely wrong what the Global Methodist Church is doing. It's simply an understanding of what are the facts that you need to know before you sign on that dotted line. You may like this, this is great. We need the accountability. We need a denomination that will do these things and back us when we do it. Because that same charge conference, when they got all upset, my district superintendent, who was wonderful, said, you know what, you should have never done this. I was like, but it's what I'm supposed to be doing. Doesn't matter. They're like, don't ever do this again. And that was the pastoral response, but it wasn't necessarily the book of discipline response. Now, as we kind of gloss over the clergy part, I want to turn to page 16 of this document to talk about some of what it takes for joining the Methodist Church or Global Methodist Church and what the process is. Now, some of this has been spelled out in greater detail since we wrote this in May, especially within our own conference. there are specific processes local congregations need to take. There are things that have to be paid. There are for lack of better words, fees to take care of. And each annual conference has their own process and plan, which has led to a whole lot of confusion. That it's led to bringing in outside lawyers to try and make it fair, complaints to the Judicial Council, these kinds of things. And some annual conferences are getting away with this cheaper than others. And we can argue the merits of that any way we want, but know that the plan is specific to Western Pennsylvania. It does include apportionments, it includes pension obligations, values of property, and those things have changed, and so I'm not very familiar with them. If that is a part you're going to move forward on, that's a question for the bishop and your district superintendent to really outline those costs. But know that it is not cheap. We explored how much it would cost for Nixon United Methodist Church, for my congregation, and it was approximately just under one complete budget, 1 year's budget entirely is what it would take for us to leave. Other churches I'm seeing are somewhere less than that, some are seeing more than that, but that's what it would be for us. And so you need to be prepared for that.
So,
Yes?
Pastor Steve, can you share that number with all the folks?
Pardon me?
It's about $250,000.
It's just under $250,000 for this congregation. That includes 2 years of apportionments, this year and next year. It also includes our portion of the unfunded pension liability, which is just under $119,000. It also includes 2% of the value of our property that's reported on line 25 of the statistical reports, which for this congregation is 3.3 something million. Okay, so it's 2% of that. And that total is just under 250,000 for this congregation. Okay?
Who requires that?
Pardon me?
Who requires that?
The Western Pennsylvania Annual Conference trustees.
The United Methodist Church.
Yes.
Now, can I ask,
Yes?
is that more or less than your annual budget?
Left.
It's less? Okay.
That's a good piece.
It's a good piece of it, yeah. That's a significant number.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but that is also numbers I had heard, but I didn't know they were official numbers, so that's why I didn't want to share that.
We got those from the bishop a couple weeks ago.
Okay, then yeah.
They're technically not official to the annual conference votes on.
And
That's what the
until
trustees-
we meet with the Board of Trustees for the conference. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So for this congregation, it's about $250,000. Now, when we talk about leaving the denomination, it is a separate thing to leave the denomination and join the Global Methodist Church. Those are technically two separate actions. You can choose to leave the United Methodist Church and not join the Global Methodist. And we have seen churches that have gone and independent. There's actually a Wesleyan network of like 6 churches in the country. They're huge Methodist churches. They form their own thing. I have heard of, although I don't know personally, other churches that are joining the Wesleyan church or just staying independent and doing their own thing, and that can be done. That is separate than joining the Global Methodist Church.
There's some churches in Alabama that have become Free Methodists.
Yes, Free Methodist is they're another large denomination. And that's actually not unusual. If we go all the way back to the EUB merger, there are churches that rejected the merger and stayed as Evangelical United Brethren or stayed independent. Actually, just north of Butler, There is the largest EUB church that's still operating. It's a beautiful church. I was there once and it was wonderful. That is an option for you. But if you did want to join the Global Methodist Church, then there are things to be prepared for. If you join the Global Methodist Church and you decide that you don't like it, or you decide that you want to teach something differently, the Global Methodist Church will specify steps to bring the church back into conformity. But if they don't come back in, the Leadership Council of the Global Methodist Church has the authority to remove you against your will. Now, to me, that's actually not a bad idea. And I don't want to slam that idea. What I want to point out is, if you spend $250,000 to leave the United Methodist Church and join the Global Methodist Church, and then they kick you out, you don't get your 250 grand back. And also, to my knowledge, there is no process yet to come back into the United Methodist Church. I have heard they are working on that, but I have not seen that. Yes?
But correct me if I'm wrong here, if you disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church, the assets that are held at the trust level become the assets of the congregation when you satisfy that 250,000. So
Yes.
the building and property belongs to us.
Yes.
So then, if the Global Methodist Church says you're no longer welcome here in the Global Methodist Church, they basically are cutting us out with all of our assets.
Yes.
So the $250,000 is not necessarily just to disaffiliate. It is to get our assets back in the pocket of Elizabeth and the community here versus at the quote corporate level at the United Methodist Church.
Yes. However, we can talk a little bit later on. If you are removed, there are still going to be things that they ask you to pay. They don't call it apportionment, but that cost is going to be added to you. Those kinds of things are going to become due, which you'd still keep your building, you'd still have your assets, but that will be asked of you. And again, you might like this idea of accountability. Actually, I don't even necessarily think it's a bad idea, because, well, how many United Methodist churches do we have that aren't living into the denominational standards at this point? But you need to be aware that it is a possibility. Now, what was your name?
Ryan.
Brian, as you were saying, in the Global Methodist Church, the church will own its property. Now, you're going to be subject to the laws and legal authority under which you were incorporated, or the church was incorporated into, and that's state and local. Nobody can do anything about that. But there is no trust clause. There is no trust clause. That, however, while that might be good, you might like that, it might not be the most beneficial thing for you. It might not be the most beneficial thing for the church. And I say that because there are an untold number of events that we can't even plan for. But I'll share this story. In Butler, Pennsylvania, there was a black gospel church. And it was actually started by former slaves who helped care for Abraham Lincoln after he was shot. They had moved into Butler and started this church. 35 years ago, the last member of that church died. The building sat empty until last year, when the township came in and said, there's no owner, there's nobody to contact. What do we do with this building? They were actually going to tear it down because it had fallen into complete disrepair. Within the United Methodist Church, that can't happen. That can't happen because of the trust clause. That building can still be dedicated as a national landmark, which is actually what's happening now. Some folks actually got together decided it was a historical landmark and they're moving it up to Slippery Rock where it can be used for education purposes. But that was sheer luck. So sometimes that trust clause might be a good thing, and to simply dismiss it because we want to own our building may not be the best for your church. It might be. Please don't misunderstand. It might be, but it might not be. And so we need to be prepared for that. Now, this is the part that we don't always think about. And it's on page 18. If you join the Global Methodist Church, or if you leave the United Methodist Church, you're going to have to change a few things that are going to cost you money that is not part that gets paid to the conference to leave. For example, you can no longer use your cross and flame. If you've got it on your building, you're going to have to take it down. If you've got it on your church logo, you're going to have to take it down. If you've got it on your employee t-shirts, you're going to have to get them new shirts. This is all in our United Methodist Book of Discipline that only United Methodist churches get to use it. You will have to change your name. You'd have to become Central Highlands Global Methodist Church, which makes sense until you think about your incorporation paperwork or your sign out there. How much is it going to cost to change your sign? How much is it going to cost to change your legal name on your incorporation documents? I do not have an answer for this. You will need a lawyer for that because it is legal paperwork and local laws vary from place to place, and I am not qualified to tell you that other than you're going to need a lawyer. There may be, and I don't know, other legal issues which need to be considered. I don't know what those are. I can't even speculate. But they're going to be there, they're going to crop up, and they will cost money. Now here's the other big thing. In the Global Methodist Church, the question is, well, we don't have to pay apportionments anymore. Not quite. It's connectional funding. The Global Methodist Church outlines their process for connectional funding in their paragraph 349. First, it says the local treasurer, the church treasurer, is responsible to calculate the apportionment fund. But it will take 1.5% of its operating expenses to the Global Methodist Church General Church, and 5% to the Global Methodist Church's annual conference. So you will pay 6.5% of your operating expenses in apportionments. Now, that might not be a bad thing. That is less than our current Western Pennsylvania formula, which is 11.7% or something like that. So it is less. So that's nice. You're going to save some money there. However, in their draft book of doctrines and disciplines, paragraph 354, says if you fail to pay this in full, it can result in a church being involuntarily disaffiliated from the Global Methodist Church. Not saying it will happen, I'm saying it can. And this might not be a big deal if your church has lots of money and is on sure footing. But if your budget's anything like mine after COVID, well, what happens if you don't pay it in full? And we have churches in our conference who have apportionments of like $300 and they still can't afford to pay it. What happens then? What happens when the church falls on hard times and can't afford it? Now, I want to believe that the leadership of the Global Methodist Church loves Jesus and loves the local church. And so I would hope that they would have a process of bringing you into compliance and of being grace-filled. But what if you still can't afford it? Then what happens? Here in the United Methodist Church, and I guess this probably goes back to the accountability thing, if you don't pay it, what happens? They might move your pastor.
That's the threat.
That's the threat, is if you don't pay it, we'll move your pastor and give you someone cheaper so you can afford it. I'll be honest, and maybe some of the other pastors here have seen this. I've never seen that happen. I'm sure that it has, but you're still United Methodist. You still have a pastor. And this is that accountability. That might be good, it might be bad. I don't know. But this goes into the next piece. Can a congregation be removed from the Global Methodist Church against its will? Yes, and there are two ways it happens. Not paying your apportionments, and consistently advancing doctrines and engaging practices not in conformity with the Book of Doctrines and Disciplines. Now, that might be a good thing. If you are Global Methodist and you want that conformity, that's a good thing. But this is where that question of having to pay money again. If it happens, you will be required to immediately pay your unfunded pension obligation. So you just paid $250,000 to leave. Now you get in trouble and you have to leave. Now you have to pay your unfunded pension obligation. Again. Yes, Jenny.
Pension obligation in the GMC is going to be a defined benefit program, so it won't be unfunded.
It won't be what?
It won't be unfunded. It'll be fully funded for pay.
So,
Different calculation in the GMC. So what we have unfunded now because it's not a complete, and I can't, this is all I know about it.
okay.
Tapping the depths of my financial knowledge here. But it is a defined benefit, so it will not create any unfunded liability.
Okay.
So that's just.
But can you double check me on paragraph 354 that says you would still have to pay it? Whatever that number is, or how that works, and maybe they will change it. Maybe they'll change it if that's how it is going to be.
I don't see anything.
Okay.
Liability in 354.
Okay. David, do you see that?
No, the unfunded liability is what you have to pay to disaffiliate. I think it's safe to say that it's unclear what's going to happen in the Global Methodist Church until you have your first general conference. So,
In this transitional book, it does not address it. The plan is for it to be defined.
I would be curious why, interestingly enough, was this expulsion clause, as I call it, in the transitional book, but not in the proposed draft of,
I don't know.
okay. Because I understand you were one of the contributing writers of this.
There was a draft book, but then it was refined by the.
Okay. That's an interesting shift, I think. I don't know what that portends, but it's something I noticed.
It also has a, it's not immediately, there's an absolute.
So, and if you didn't hear that, because it's not on the microphone, if you didn't hear that, the comment was, why is this in the transitional book of Doctrines and Disciplines and not in the final draft book of Doctrines and Disciplines? And we don't have an answer for that, but ultimately, that is a difference, and we're not sure what that means. No one's going to necessarily know what that means until it happens. Yes?
The draft book came first.
The draft book came first.
The additional and refined what was in the draft.
Okay. So it was added in instead of taken out. Okay. So regardless of whether or not you have to pay that money, and that seems to be the question there, it can still happen that you would be removed. Now, let's talk about being an independent church for a moment. If you're out of the Global Methodist Church, or you just decide not to join the Global Methodist Church, how will you find a pastor? How will you credential that pastor so that it is legal for them to do weddings? How will you find health insurance for them? I don't know if you've tried to buy health insurance for one person lately. How will you provide their pension? And there are ways to do this, but do you really want to spend the time trying to figure that out? There are people out here who don't know who Jesus is, and now we got to spend time trying to figure out how to give our pastor health insurance. There's people out there who don't know who Jesus is, and we have to figure out the best way to make sure our pastor has clergy credentials. And there are independent churches who have figured this out, and I'm not saying it's insurmountable. This last section, could there be a time in the Global Methodist Church, or when a church in the Global Methodist Church does not have a pastor? The answer to that is yes, maybe. Especially in the very beginning. You're going to vote to to be, let's say you vote to leave, you vote to become a Global Methodist Church, there's going to be an effective date on that. We're going to pick, October 31st. Once you are no longer United Methodist, unless your pastor is going with you, they're not your pastor. Now, there is a place for cross-denomination appointments. There is a place for extending that, but that's not a guarantee. Well, now you have no pastor. Until the Global Methodist Church accepts your congregation in there and starts the process of getting you a pastor. So, you all are making that decision. Nixon United Methodist Church has already made the decision. We are staying United Methodist. But I am staying United Methodist. So if they were to leave the denomination, the date of its effective date, I am no longer their pastor. Which means until the Global Methodist Church starts their process of getting you a pastor, or getting Nixon a pastor, they wouldn't have one. Which, if that's a week or two, if it's a month, it's probably not a big deal. You can survive that long. I just took a month's spiritual renewal leave. My church, they survived, it was fine. But what if it takes longer? How long could you go? And of course, the church is led by the people, but how long could you go? What would happen? And you can read about the ways in which you get a pastor as a Global Methodist Church. You can read about that. There are actually some very good things in there, and I don't want to take away from that. This goes back to, do you like it or not? They are working on a more of a mixed system. Right now, in the United Methodist Church, the bishop sends the pastor. And they're supposed to have conversation with the SPRC. The depth of that conversation is varied across the denomination. But in the Global Methodist Church, they are requiring some conversation. They are specifically requiring conversation with pastors of color, female pastors. This is great. And allowing the SPRC to have some say into it, which is good. But on the other side of that, if that church doesn't want a woman pastor, or doesn't want an African American pastor, that church isn't going to get one. And we can say, oh, that makes sense because they didn't want them anyway. That would be unwise to send them there, until we realize that our women clergy are incredibly gifted. And there are churches that may not know they want a woman pastor until they get one and realize this is the best decision ever. But because the system is different, which again, you might like that, but it might also disenfranchise the women clergy, or the clergy of color. These are big questions to ask. Now, if you are a pastor, or if you are going to become ordained, one of the interesting pieces here is it gives, the Global Methodist Church gives the bishops final say on whether or not a person gets ordained. And they have to ask specific questions about upholding denominational standards, which is great, unless your bishop doesn't like you. You just don't get ordained. Unless the bishop decides, I'm not going to ordain a woman clergy. Now, they have to give reasons for it. They can't just blanket say that. They have to say, we are not ordaining you because of X, Y, and Z. Here's what it is. And that's great. But would you rather have your pastor approved by one person, or by an entire committee of people who have examined and studied and said yes? I don't know. You get to pick that. When you make this decision on joining Global Methodist Church, that is your decision to make. Now, I think I'm over my time.
You're fine.
I'm fine, okay. I have no idea. We'll blame it on my legal aid.
Pastor Gilligan, quick-
Yes.
So, any sense of the clergy in the United Methodist Church? You mentioned, yourself, you're going to stay United Methodist even if your church is disaffiliated. Any sense of, how the clergy is split? Was there a survey? Is there any sense of, how many would be exiting?
So, I have not seen official numbers. Let me back up. So you're asking what is the sense of clergy and who's going to go Global Methodist and who's not?
Correct.
Yes? Okay. I have not seen any official numbers. But I also, this is me, would not trust any official numbers because some bishops have said, if you say you're going Global Methodist, it's effective immediately in your doctrine. So those pastors can now no longer faithfully say what they're going to do. And to me, that's not okay. That's wrong in my opinion, but that means I can't trust those official numbers either. And again, because I am biased, most of my friends have said they are staying United Methodist, so I really don't know how many are going to the Global Methodist Church. And it varies from annual conference to annual conference. I know last estimation, there were approximately 300 churches in Western Pennsylvania exploring disaffiliation. If every one of them takes their pastor, that's 300 pastors, but I don't know. Maybe somebody else is. Janet, have you seen, you would know, right?
Well, our bishop was one of those who said that if you apply, if you seek ordination or transfer, or even say that, then.
Yeah, I wasn't going to put that out there while it's being recorded, but yes, our bishop did say that.
Yes. So
Yeah.
you're not gonna get those people
Yeah.
to say that in this conference because we're sort of under a gag order.
Yes. And again, you can decide if that's right or wrong or how you feel about that.
It would seem likely that if a church and a pastor and a congregation are of the same mind and in sync, a pastor might be more likely to do that.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if you mentioned, but you say there's no guaranteed appointment in the Global Methodist
Yes.
Church.
I did not say that because that's more for the clergy. I didn't
Right,
go into
but that
that.
does have implications. I
And there's
think.
also no reasoning that somebody that is in a church that wants to stay United Methodist is not a global, want to be a conservative global minister. So it
Yeah.
works both ways.
Right.
Yeah, oh yes, oh yes.
There are
Yeah.
pastors that may likely want to go Global Methodist, but their
But they're in
congregation.
a congregation. that's
I would
united.
think there would be a greater kind of discernment there because you're moving into a place where, or if your congregation and you both go, even in the documents, that's fine. The Global Methodist Church has said they're going to be willing to maintain those appointments for the foreseeable future. It's where, regardless of which side wants to go what way, where there's a differentiation.
Minister.
Yeah, right, there's where you're gonna have your problem, I think.
Well, I would assume that if the minister wants to go and they decide to stay, then it's up to him. And I cannot see.
Or her, so put that out there.
Or her,
Yeah.
whatever, that they can't, that they can just go ahead. Because there are gonna be congregations that need ministers.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there are probably gonna be some congregations that may need 2 ministers. The larger ones.
Yes. Yes. So to answer your question, I have no idea, and I would not trust any official numbers at this point. So yeah.